Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Barnstable This Morning. Just about 20 minutes toward the top of the hour. I'm Sarah Colvin, and joining me live on the phone, I welcome Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, and I know you had and hope you had a great Thanksgiving, as all your listeners hopefully did.
Wonderful, and likewise to you, Dan. So, of course, the hot topic, been hearing a lot about this on the news, really not just the local news, but the national news, too, is the issue of minimum wage. And of course, some legislation, or at least it passed the Senate, right? The proposed minimum wage rate hike. Tell me a little bit about where we are in terms of that legislative process.
Well, it did pass the Senate 32 to 7 right before we broke last week on Wednesday. And where we are now is the Senate has passed a bill. It's in the hands of the House to move forward with it if they choose to do it. They actually don't have to do anything with it. So that's where it is. And it's very unclear. The Speaker has not really made it clear whether he intends to allow it to move in the House. I do want to say, of course, that I'm getting a lot of feedback from the Senate. It was a bill that I introduced on the floor and spoke to. It's a bill that I strongly support. I'm meeting tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact, with some folks from the Hyannis Chamber of Commerce to talk about it. But, Sarah, the more I've learned about this issue in preparation for helping to move this bill through, the more urgent and important I think it is. And you know the story about if you want to boil a frog and you throw it into boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cold water and turn the heat up slowly, it'll stay in there until the water's boiling. Have you heard that story?
I have.
Sort of gross, but that's what's happened at the lower end of our socioeconomic ladder over the last 45 years. Minimum wage since 1968 in Massachusetts has gone down by 25%. And I don't want to overburden you with statistics, but if you look at the median worker in Massachusetts, that wage has gone from about $16 an hour to about $19 an hour in that time period. And at the 80th percentile, the wages have gone from about $25 an hour to about $35 an hour. So you have the middle, i.e. 50th percentile, and you have the 80th percentile having gone up anywhere from 18 or so to 40% in those two cases, okay? Again, the top end doing better, and you and I have discussed this over the past couple of years. But what's really striking about the statistic is if you look at the minimum wage, it's now at $8 an hour. 45 years ago, the minimum wage was at the equivalent of $10.72 an hour, which means that since 1968, it's gone down 25%. And you know, the first question I'm asking people who bring this, sort of criticize or chastise me for pushing this legislation through, the first question I ask back is, do you think it's right that at the lower end of our earning spectrum, wages have gone down 25% in the last 45 years? And, people make up a lot of reasons for why they don't want to support increasing the minimum wage, but I'll tell you, that's a hard question to answer. Do you think that's right?
It certainly is, but I can certainly understand some of the concern from the business community in terms of what kind of financial impact this is going to have on their businesses. Obviously, it's a gradual rate. It's not going to jump from $8 to $11 an hour right away, but certainly over the course of time. And my question, Dan, is are there any provisions or how would you respond to, how will the salaries of other workers be adjusted? Will they be adjusted? Is that something that you think the businesses are going to have to do if the minimum wage workers are all of a sudden making more? What about the people who have worked to kind of move up the ladder?
Well, Sarah, look, there's rhetoric on one side of this argument, and there's hard facts on the other. This is not speculation. We can look at cases where both in Massachusetts and in other states, minimum wage has gone up. It has not had a deleterious or negative effect on employment numbers, and in fact, what it has been is stimulative of the economy. And one of the things that I'm saying to other business leaders is that I trust business leaders. I have confidence in business leaders that they will be able to successfully react to that. The entrepreneurs in this community are smart, and they will be able to adjust and they will be able to accommodate an increase in the minimum wage such that the business community will remain healthy. We will circulate more money through the economy because, after all, we're putting more money into the hands of people who will spend it. And if anything, it will stimulate the economy. In fact, it will. So, I want to have this dialogue with other business folks. I'm not going to hide from it because there's a lot of evidence out there that it does not negatively impact employment and this is not anecdotal. I know there's going to be a lot of anecdotal evidence about people who are going to say, well, we're going to lay people off, or we're not going to hire people, or we're not going to expand. That's not what the evidence shows in other cases where minimum wage has gone up, either in Massachusetts or in other states. So, my immediate pushback is whether or not this will have a negative impact on the business community, because I don't believe it will.
Indeed. Are there any statistics available as to how many minimum wage jobs there are currently in Massachusetts, and perhaps the typical time someone spends in a minimum wage job? I mean, I'm just thinking of my experience. It's you get a job, you're hired, whether you start off at minimum wage, you go through a training period, then perhaps 6 months or a year later, you get a raise, et cetera. Has there been a trend lately of people staying in minimum wage jobs much longer than they should?
Well, not only has there been a trend of people staying in longer, but the trend is really disturbing is that we have both high school and college educated folks. 70% of the people earning minimum wage have at least a high school diploma, 73% actually. And a significant, I think over 40% have college degrees. So what's happening is, as the middle class and as middle class jobs have been squeezed and gone away, people with education and training are being forced to take lower end jobs. So certainly that is a trend that we've seen, and it's a disturbing trend. The number of people who would be impacted by this are over 580,000 in the Commonwealth. Now, not all of them are at minimum wage, but all of those folks are below 11 an hour. So over the course of the next 3 years, they would be bumped up. And, of course, those workers that are slightly above the minimum wage would also be raised also, because as the minimum wage moves up, there's evidence that those that are slightly above it will move up as well. So this would have an impact on more than roughly 20% of our workforce here in Massachusetts, maybe about 25%. But the really neat thing is how much more money it would put in circulation to be spent and stimulate the economy.
Indeed, because we can talk about the positive for the moment, and thinking about, some of those families where people are earning the minimum wage and they are not even making enough to scrape by. Certainly, I think we've all had experiences starting out where, you have to decide between putting gas in your car or buying groceries, or do I pay the heating bill this month? And certainly, I know here on Cape Cod, if you are making a minimum wage salary, or even, $2 or $3 above minimum wage, you're not going to be able to do that, and you're going to have to be making those tough decisions. So I can certainly see that where making this increase is certainly going to not only be beneficial to quality of life for people, but people are going to be able to have that money, not just to pay their bills, but perhaps to put a little bit more back into the economy.
Well, Sarah, when you and I were kids, and I was a kid a lot longer ago than you were, but I remember that first job, which was a minimum wage job, and I actually was making minimum wage when I started as an aircraft mechanic, believe it or not. But we waxed poetic about those days in our childhood where we were struggling to get by and living in a base-room apartment or a room in a house. And, we were kids, but that's not the profile of the minimum wage earner now. The minimum wage earner is usually somebody, and over almost 60% of them are women, who are really trying to make a household work and support a family. And very often there's more than one minimum wage earner in a home. So it's not the profile of the first job when we get out of high school or college, and we're kids and we're starting off at the lower end of the early in life with a low wage earning job. These are very often people trying to support families. And as you pointed out, when you look at the cost of housing and food and energy and healthcare and education, especially here on Cape Cod, it just doesn't even come close to being a livable wage. So we know that this will stimulate the economy. For those small businesses that are worried about it, and I like to use the example of an ice cream store. Yes, you may have to pay for the kid behind the counter some more money working in the summer, but the line out the door should be a lot longer when more people in the neighborhood have discretionary income to buy an ice cream cone. And, it sounds like a leap of faith, but these are real numbers and real statistics. We want to get people out there spending. That will help small business a lot more than keeping minimum wage so far below a livable wage, because that's not helping anybody.
Absolutely. It begs the question, too, though, that I have to say, when we think about the people in these minimum wage jobs who are working and struggling, the question is, why aren't they advancing? Is it just that the job opportunities aren't there? Do we need to look at what's available and why these people aren't advancing? Or is it simply because, for other reasons? I mean, do you feel that that's something that needs to be looked at as we look at this issue, too?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, you and I, again, we've spoken about so many issues over the last several years. Minimum wage is just part of the economic package that we need to move forward with to really get our economy going. So, A, we need to stimulate the economy and start doing some of the great infrastructure projects you and I have talked about, which will put people to work at good paying jobs. We need to continue to invest in education and workforce training and workforce development. That's a key component of this. And we need to understand that there is a real issue with an economy that's in transition and an economy that's becoming more and more global. So part of the economic package, and only a very small part of it, is raising the minimum wage at the low end. But then you're right. We need to fortify the other rungs of the ladder, everything from training, workforce training, to education, to getting some of those projects doing. We've talked about wastewater. That's going to create jobs, those projects. We've talked about transportation infrastructure. We've talked about rebuilding the energy grid. All of those, if we can commit to and invest in those projects, will also create jobs that are significantly above minimum wage and get the economy going. So we got to be, real careful not to think that minimum wage and increasing it is a panacea to anything. But it's an important part. It's an important component to, I think, a comprehensive economic package that will really get the Commonwealth going again.
Certainly. So this bill, of course, as you mentioned, excuse me, has passed the Senate. Not sure whether the House needs to take action or not. In terms of looking at a timeline or when perhaps we might see some more movement on this, can you give us any insight on that?
It's what I'm hearing from the House side is honestly, Sarah, it's disturbing because the Speaker has been very guarded on what he says about this bill or doesn't. And then he keeps talking about tying it to a reform in unemployment insurance or to some package that he wants to balance it and give something back to business. I understand that tendency. I'm a business guy. But for God's sake, minimum wage has gone down 25%. And if the Speaker of the House is unable to look at that reality and have enough courage to step forward and say to the business community, enough, we need to help the people at the bottom. The middle and the top have done much better over the last 25 to 50 years than the people at the bottom, then shame on him. And I think that's a conversation I intend to have in the State House. The people in the House of Representatives have to step forward and say it is time to look at this in the face and to understand what these statistics are showing. And when you connect the dots, what the picture is we're looking at, then get off their butts and do something about it.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, I thank you so much for all of your efforts, and thank you so much, as always, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us here on Barnstable This Morning. Thank you so much, and we'll talk with you next week.
Have a great week, Sarah. Thanks a lot.
You too. Bye-bye. Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf joining us here on Barnstable This Morning.